Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here. Today is Wednesday, the 29th. We are at 29th of November already. Welcome to another episode of UnWoke.Academy. Today we're going to talk about size. And size, believe me, does matter. Now that I've got your attention, we're actually talking about investment vehicles like mutual funds. Size does matter in mutual funds, but exactly in the opposite way that you probably are thinking. So the big push for decades now has been these big, mega, outlandishly large, huge mutual funds, and not just mutual funds, but other types of pooled investments. Pausing there for a moment. What do I mean when I say pooled investments? So there are forever in the history of investing, the big thing was for people to work with a personal financial advisor or stockbroker or somebody, and they would buy investments for that individual. Well, that changed starting kind of in the 1980s and in earnest in the 1990s into pooled investments. That's giving the management of your portfolio over to somebody else in addition to your financial advisor. So you might have a financial advisor, or maybe you don't, you just buy directly online. But it's become very common, especially in things like 401k plans and or IRA, and for the most part, brokerage accounts that people invest in, to be in a mutual fund or something like it. When you're in one of those pooled investments that has an ongoing and continuous maintenance and administrative fee, those are generally referred to as a pooled investment. So if you know more about the markets, you may be familiar with the term exchange traded funds. And then there are some other less common, but certainly still relevant types of investment vehicles, in addition to mutual funds and exchange traded funds. Those are the two most talked about, but you have collective investment trusts, you have co-advised funds, sub-accounts, unit investment trusts, and it goes on from there. There are other types of vehicles. But just talking for a moment about mutual funds, because those are the most commonly understood and most often used, especially, as I said, in things like a 401k plan, size does matter. So here's a thing. And I want to set the stage by talking about a now famous and infamous court case that happened years and years ago. In this court case, there were one of the main issuers of mutual funds was on the stand for something unrelated to the size of their portfolios. It actually gets kind of complicated, but what the trial was about is kind of irrelevant. During the course of those trials, they had a series of the managers, the portfolio managers. Those are the people and teams that decide on what to buy and sell in the mutual fund. They had them on the stand and were kind of questioning these mutual fund managers. Now, mind you, back then, these are mutual funds that had several $100 million. And that was really big. It was huge back then to have a mutual fund with hundreds of millions, maybe approaching $1 billion in it. And in deposition, in the court proceedings, these managers went on to say that they admitted in court records that they felt that the size of the mutual fund was too big. They had too much money, and they couldn't effectively manage the mutual fund and work for the client's best interest, the client being you, the investor. Here's how that works. So imagine, and it starts to make sense when you look at the markets and how they work. Imagine you have, imagine that you have $1 million. Poof, I've waved a magic wand, and you're a millionaire now. If I could do that for all of you, my friends, I would, but just imagine, hypothetically speaking, that you have $1 million. And you're going to manage that $1 million, and you look at different companies that you might buy, and you pick a few, and with some may go up a little bit, some may go down a little bit. With $1 million spread out among 30, 40, 50, however many different investments that you make with your $1 million, it really doesn't take a whole lot for you to have a pretty good return on that investment. Because if something goes up, if you have $200,000 in it and something goes up 10%, that's a pretty significant return, and you experience a very positive return. If you start that way, but then years later find that you have billions of dollars, then it takes a massive amount of the portfolio, like hundreds of millions of dollars. When you're in billions and above billions of dollars in the mutual fund, if you invest that same $200,000 and it goes up 13%, it's not even noticeable. In order to be able to get a good return for that portfolio, you have to make major moves and buy huge amounts of something. And so what that led to, and the managers were admitting on stage, not on stage, in court, was that they didn't have enough free capital. And then if they did, let's say they actually, it was so big they could harm themselves. They could harm the very portfolio that their job was to protect and try to grow. So let's imagine an opposite scenario. They have a couple $1 billion, and now actually, when you look at some of these mutual funds, and that's actually small. These have gotten so big and so out of hand, it's beyond reason to think that they could actually effectively do their job and manage these things. So in that giant ultra mega sized portfolio, again, speaking, this would have been around the year 2003, 2004, I think were the cases. And then I'm kind of a nerd like that. I track these, I watch these cases. But in that scenario, let's imagine that they've got all this money and they suspect that something bad is going to happen to one of the stocks that they own in the portfolio. And they're kind of reading the tea leaves, and they imagine that some bad earnings report or something, a change in leadership, or the chairman or CEO drops out or quits the company. They might anticipate that the stock price could drop. Well, when you're that big and you have that much money, it's not like they can go and sell hundreds of thousands of shares of that company. They have to sell them in small increments over many days. So for them to move out of that company, it's going to take them a whole lot of moves, which means that if they're right, and whatever that thing was that harms the company, the bad earnings report or the chairman resigning or something, whatever that was, they have to either be way far in advance and know it months ahead of time in order to orchestrate and plan their exit from that stock, or they're slowly whittling away and moving away from that stock and getting out of it at the same time the damaging news report hits. And maybe they're proven right, but the stock continues to decline and they just can't move out of it fast enough. But then it gets even weirder. So imagine these big mutual funds, they have all these billions of dollars and they have such a huge position in one of these companies. And imagine that they start seeing some bad writing on the wall and they're predicting something bad for that company and they start to move out of it. Well, here's the thing that happens, and everybody knows this. The market's kind of an open book with a few exceptions. But when a big money manager starts to exit a stock and they start taking shares out of a company, everybody notices. So you've got lots of other people out there, lots of amateurs, and nowadays people have apps on their phone, and they might see on their phone that such and such manager is pulling out, and then they'll look it up and see, wow, they've been pulling out huge chunks and coming out of that company every day for the past several days in a row. Then alarm bells go off, and then word spreads, and then everybody starts vacating that stock before the mutual fund that you're invested in can respond appropriately based on their expectations, their research. And maybe they sensed something because they have a good research team before the markets did. And that's what all research teams want to be able to do. That's kind of their job. They want to try to predict what's going to happen to a company and the stocks that they own. But in that scenario, you've got that ultra big mega mutual fund, and they just simply can't get out of it fast enough. And they end up kind of damaging the very company that they own a lot of. It's a really bad environment to be in. So, hence the title of this episode, Size Matters. Small mutual funds, spectacular. Because in a small mutual fund, you look at the size of that, and that same mutual fund and that same position. Let's say you're throwing in $1,000 a paycheck into some company, and they're just slowly building up, and they're putting more and more into that mutual fund, and they pick some company, and they think it's really going to be a winner, and let's say they do a good job. It doesn't take all that much money to have a major impact on that portfolio if it's $100 million. That's a world of difference between $100 or $150 million and billions of dollars. So the thing to be aware of, and plus, imagine the other scenario, the opposite scenario. Imagine you have that same $1,000 you're throwing in, good for you, hoorah, you're doing a great job, dollar cost averaging, you're throwing in a little bit from each paycheck into the 401k plan, and then the manager, the mutual fund portfolio manager, senses something may be bad about one of the stocks that's in that mutual fund. They might decide, I think we're going to scale back or withdraw completely from that company. That smaller mutual fund can probably do it in a few short moves. And within a day or two, they're out of it, and your money then is protected from the bad thing that they're anticipating may happen. So all this stuff, people get caught up in exactly the opposite of what they should be looking for in things like mutual funds. Now, there is such a thing as too small. If it's too small, it might be startup. And I have to throw this in there. Bear with me a second. But there are managers out there, portfolio managers, that have huge amounts of experience, and they may have been co-managing some mutual fund for a long time, and then they leave and go somewhere else. They strike out on their own, or within the company, they have a new model, an objective. They decide on a new type of mutual fund portfolio. That's great because that's somebody with experience. You may still want to watch them because they're kind of starting off on a new track, but at least they have a track record that you can look at to show their worth. And there's a little bit of a trade-off. There's a little bit of art and a little bit of science to this. When you're looking at a manager, if you see that there's a really small amount in it, you also want to look for for somebody who is new and just starting off and doesn't have experience. And of course, we're in the process of going UnWoke. We don't want the one that's out there just jumping into the game and becoming a portfolio manager, and they're throwing all their money into the same woke-a-doodle stuff everybody else is throwing their money into. That you don't want them buying Target and I almost said BlackRock. Target and Anheuser-Busch, which is the parent company of Bud Light, and Nike, and whatever, all these companies that we keep talking about, that if you are not far left, extreme, woke, ESG, CBDC, all that bad stuff, if you're opposed to that, well, if you're not opposed to it, you're probably on the wrong channel. Welcome. ESG loving people. I'll probably, by the end, if you listen to these, I'll probably talk you out of wanting to be there also. Or if you stay in love with ESG and everything, at least maybe I can help point you in the direction of figuring out that it's nonsense and to do your own research into far left woke companies and causes. But for everybody else, this is the stuff that we're talking about not wanting to have in your portfolio. All these bad companies that we keep doing the research reports on. And by the way, I think you probably already know, we're in the process of bringing in the research and analytics of Second Vote. So Second Vote has been around since 2012 and has been applying what I call the 6 pillars of freedom. It's assessing the corporate behaviors of companies on a Judeo-Christian capitalist measure, which weeds out all the ESG stuff. So those companies, what I plan to do is get to the point where we're communicating on not just individual companies like Target and stuff, but also those managers, things like mutual funds. It's a huge, expansive undertaking, but I do want to get to that place. But in the meantime, the managers that we're going to be talking about and the ones that I am suggesting you look at are going to be a combination of 2 things, not just UnWoke, but also UnWoke at a reasonable size that is able to move in and out of issues fast enough to be successful for you on your behalf. That means that we're going to be talking about some names that you may not have heard of. By all means, and you absolutely should, do a few things. One is jump online and do some of your own research. Check these managers out, find out where they come from, their background, their stance on issues. You can even look at their social media. A lot of them, you can start to look at how they respond to markets, their track record, what they've done, what they've accomplished, the types of portfolios they've managed, what markets they've worked in. So for instance, let's say we're looking at large US companies or small, micro and emerging US companies or Europe or doesn't matter. Whatever the objective of that portfolio, we want to see that the people managing that portfolio have some experience. So it's for me and for us, and the conversations we have about UnWoke investing, it's a couplefold. Part of the reason that I bring this up is because sometimes people ask, looking at a good example is, let's say they have a list of mutual fund options within their 401k plan, and they're all the usual suspects. They're all the big behemoth, mega globalist types of portfolio managers. And, or let's just use an example. It's actually a live example. I've seen this places where the whole lineup might be only Vanguard, or it might be only BlackRock, or it's a mix of those two. My suggestion for going UnWoke is to avoid both of them. Get out. You can find better things, not only that are UnWoke, but are small and manageable. They're great, great managers out there doing wonderful things that you should enjoy, not just from the UnWoke perspective, but also from the standpoint of being able to move as the markets move and to be able to act quickly and react quickly on their market expectations. So expect some conversation. Oh, I started to say I sidetracked myself, darn it. So what I started to say is, as you look at those sheets and you look at the conversations we're having, or you get a list of 401k options at your employer or whatever, shoot them to us. Let us take a look. We'll dig around and root around in those. We'll give some feedback, provide some commentary on those investments, and we'll talk not just about being UnWoke, but being unmanageable. Is it so big that it has become unmanageable? Key critical point, and that is an objective that we need to keep our eyes clearly focused on. So I'm looking at my notes here. Our conversation for, oh, I've got so many notepads on my desk. It's sort of ridiculous. I have overfilled my desk here. So, oh yeah, we're going to get back to the impact of news cycles and news media, because that is a huge role in this thing as well. So I'm Jonathan Broadbent. You have been listening to another edition of UnWoke.Academy. Oh, one more side note. I want to comment on the places that you'll find us, because I've been asked that a few times recently. And I made a point, it's actually in my notes here. I have my show notes. I almost missed it. We are on a number of different platforms. We're on the usual places, on YouTube, Rumble, Substack, and a bunch of places like that, but some other platforms, because we're trying to make a point of being available wherever you are. So in the notes, I'm going to include a link. It's to Liberty. It's a Liberty centric. No, that's the social media site. Liberty Links. It's kind of like Linktree, only for conservatives. So check out the Liberty link, and that will take you to a place that has a list of all the places you're going to find UnWoke. Check them out. If you move or like some platform better than another, feel free to find us wherever you want, multiple places, and please do click that like button down below. Send out, let's defeat the algorithms that don't want people like me out there talking about going UnWoke. Click the like button. Jonathan Broadbent here. This has been another episode of UnWoke.Academy. Thanks for listening.